Welcome students. This is the fourth lecture in the series of general anatomy, that is on muscle. Okay, and just similar to the last lecture where I have shown you some facts about the contraction of the skeletal muscle. Now this lecture is also meant for the facts about the muscle contraction, and again this is a very important lecture. Be careful and listen very carefully. Okay, so I'm going to the next slide where we will learn about the contraction of skeletal muscle. And here the big question which is asked is how muscle produce a desired movement. Okay, how muscle produces a desired movement. Now if you see or analyze any movement, okay, this is because of the contraction of the muscle which are acting on that particular joint, okay, particular joint. But though in your uh, anatomy classes, when you will go to the dissection for upper limb or lower limb as your first part of the dissection, you will be told that the movements are produced by muscles. Say for example, your teachers will tell you that the flexion at the elbow is produced by the biceps and brachialis. For simplicity, just remember that the flexion at the elbow, this is the flexion at the elbow, is produced by the muscle biceps, which is present in front of the arm, okay, anterior aspect of the arm. And from this flexion, if you go back to the original position, anatomical position, then this movement is called as extension. And they will teach you that the extension at the elbow is produced by the triceps muscle. But this is partly true. Okay, I don't say that they are giving you the wrong information, but I will tell you that this is not absolutely correct, because a desired movement in at a particular joint is not only produced by a single muscle. As for flexion, biceps, and extension, for extension I told you it is triceps. There are many more muscle involved in production of a movement, okay, in a production your desired movement, right? Now these are the following muscles which are involved in the production of a desired movement. For example, if you are sitting on a chair and if you want to drink a glass of water, you will just pick up the glass and will bring it to your mouth. Which movement is taking place here? It is the flexion movement. And if you want to keep the glass back to the table, then this is an extension movement. While producing this movement, okay, for drinking the glass of water and keeping it back onto the table, there are so many muscles are involved, okay. Though we will say that bringing the glass near to the mouth is because of the biceps contraction, because flexion movement is taking place, and keeping the glass back onto the table is the tricep muscle involved, okay, because it is an extension movement which is taking place at the elbow joint. And as I said that this is partly correct. There are many more muscle involved in this simple act of drinking water, okay. So which are these other muscles which are involved in this simple act? Okay, these are called as a group of muscle, and they are classified as prime mover. That means those muscles which are mainly responsible or major muscle in producing. And major muscle for this movement of flexion and extension at elbow, I said for flexion is biceps and for extension is the tricep. So they will be called as the prime mover. They are major muscle or the main muscles to produce the movement of the flexion and extension, okay. Now then there are other muscles, as I said, involved. Not only this single muscle is involved. And which are those other muscles? They are called as antagonist, okay. Not only prime mover, but at the same time the other muscle is also acting, okay. They are called as antagonist. I will soon explain what is an antagonist muscle is. And then there is the third group of the muscle which is also involved in for a desired movement is called as the group of fixator muscles. So these muscles, the third group muscles which are involved, they are called as fixators muscle. And then lastly, we will learn that in certain movement, there are other muscles also come into action, okay, to get a desired movement. And these muscles are called as synergists muscle. They are called as synergist muscle. They are somewhat similar to that of the fixator muscle. Okay, so these are the muscles which will be involved in just a simple movement. Not only a single muscle is involved in producing any movement in our body. Okay, so I'm moving to the next slide. Now, what are the prime mover? Let us learn what are the prime mover. Now, the prime mover are the main muscle, as I said, which are responsible for specific movement. Now, see here, this is the humerus, for example, this is the ulna, this is the elbow joint, and on the anterior aspect of this humerus, there is the attachment of this muscle called as biceps. Whenever the biceps will contract, it will pull the ulna towards the arm, that is the flexion movement will be produced. Okay, so what is this bicep? Since the bicep is involved in the production of the flexion at the elbow, it is called as the prime mover. What was your desired movement? You wanted to produce the flexion, and flexion is produced by the biceps muscle, so it is the main muscle for this movement. Okay, and that's why it is called as the prime mover. Okay, so the muscle which is mainly responsible for that particular movement is the prime mover muscle. Okay, it is called as prime mover. Now then, when this biceps muscle is contracting and bringing this ulna towards the humerus, okay, that means where the bending at the elbow is taking place. Okay, this is due to contraction of the biceps muscle, and while this biceps muscle is contracting, at the same time the opposite muscle is relaxing. At the same time, opposite muscle is relaxing. So which is the opposite muscle for the movement of flexion? The opposite movement is called as the extension. And here in the at the elbow, the extension movement is produced by the tricep. Okay, since we have learned the terms of movement in pairs: flexion, extension, abduction, adduction, medial rotation, lateral rotation. So they were in pairs. So while this flexor muscle is contracting here to produce the flexion, at the very same time, the other muscle which has the opposite action, that is the action of the uh, extension, is not contracting, but it is relaxing at the same time. And then you should note also that the speed of contraction is equal to the speed of relaxation. Okay, so the muscle which is indirectly helping the movement of flexion or bending movement at elbow joint is also assisted by the movement called as the extensor muscles. Okay, I mean say the muscle extension muscle, it is also called, I mean say held by, and these are the muscle which are called as the antagonist muscle. So which is the antagonist muscle for this biceps? Biceps antagonist is the triceps, okay, which is an extensor muscle, because if this muscle will not relax with the same speed at the speed by which the contraction is taking place in this flexor muscle biceps, okay, then this movement will not be possible. Okay, this movement will be a jerky movement, or it will be a sudden movement of the flexion. But since this muscle is which is antagonist muscle or tricep muscle, it is relaxing with the same speed, so that the movements become smooth. So indirectly the flexion is not only produced by the bicep, at the same time it is helped by the triceps, which is a extensor muscle, its opposite muscle, and this muscle is called as antagonist. Okay, this is called as antagonist muscle. Now just see here in the second diagram, when extension movement takes place here, when you are putting back the glass of water, extension movement is taking place. At that time, the extensor muscle or the tricep muscle will start contracting. Okay, so to pull back the ulna, okay, back to the normal position, from bending position to the straightening position at the elbow joint. Okay, so this muscle tricep for the movement of extension is now acting as the prime mover. Okay, it is now acting. So prime mover for the extension movement is the tricep muscle. Okay, and at the same time when extension movement is taking place, the opposite muscle, which was the bicep, is now relaxing, and it is relaxing with the same speed. So the prime mover and the role of the antagonist keeps on changing. It keeps on changing. One is contracting, the other is relaxing. Okay, and so the smooth movement. So in this way they keep on helping each other. So both the muscle act together. Okay, it is not only that the flexion is produced by the biceps and extension is produced by the tricep. The other opposite muscle at the same time is also acting either by contracting or by relaxing. Okay, and the speed of the relaxing of antagonistic muscle is the same, I mean to say pace, or the same speed as the other muscle is contracting. Okay, other muscle. I hope that you have understood that not only a single muscle is acting, here the opposite muscle is also acting. Now I move to the next slide, okay, where I will tell you about the some other muscle. Okay, now the big question is that why one muscle is contracting and at the same time other muscle is relaxing with the same speed. Okay, this is a big question, and the answer lies in its nerve supply. Okay, since a skeletal muscle is supplied by the spinal nerves, as I told you, okay, in the beginning, in the first lecture itself on the muscle. Okay, these spinal nerve, they are coming from the spinal cord. Let us see in this diagram. I will just bring the pointer here. Okay, now see here, this is the spinal cord and these are the anterior horn cells, and the group of the anterior horn cell from the spinal cord, some of them may supply to the flexor muscle, the other may supply to the extensor muscle. There are the groups, flexor groups and extensor group in the spinal cord for the neurons, anterior horn. So the stimulation of this neuron lead to the contraction of this muscle. Say for example, when the order for the flexion comes from brain through this nerve, then it divides into two branches. Okay, one of the branch will supply to the motor neurons, which will ultimately lead to the contraction of the biceps, so the flexion movements will take place. But this branch which was taking place here will go and end into another neuron in the anterior horn cell of the spinal cord, which is called as interneuron. Okay, after few days I will teach you the nervous system, general anatomy, then I will tell you about this interneuron. This interneuron then will stimulate the other neuron here, which are extensor neurons, and they will supply the antagonistic muscle, that is the triceps. Okay, so when contraction is taking place in the prime mover, that is the flexor muscle or biceps muscle here, then at the same time, because of this interneuron which is acting on the motor neuron of the tricep, at the same time this muscle is relaxing, okay, with the same speed, and speed is determined by the higher centers at this level by the interneuron. So this is how the wiring of the brain through the spinal cord ultimately control the two muscles which are required for a particular movements. Okay, so this is a form of the circuit, electric circuit is here. Okay, so inhibitory neuron, this is called as inhibitory neuron, which is just telling this tricep muscle to relax at the same speed, and this will be reversed when the contraction in triceps will take place. That means when triceps will become the prime mover, then the biceps will become the antagonist muscle, and it will start relaxing. When the tricep is contracting, the bicep will relax. Okay, biceps will relax, right? So I hope you have understood why these two different movements takes place, with one contraction, another relaxation, and with the same speed, and it is controlled by the nervous system. Okay, so this is called as reciprocal innervation. Okay, sometime some may ask you, and your examiner in Viva may ask you, what is a reciprocal innervation? Then you should draw this diagram and tell what I have told you. Okay, right. I am now moving to the next slide. Now see this slide, okay? And the third group of muscle which are necessary for a desired movement at one point. So lifting of the glass from the table and bringing it to the mouth is the prime mover is flexion, and the antagonist is the triceps muscle, which is an extensor muscle of the uh, elbow joint. Okay, but these are not only the two muscles which are acting at that time. Okay, now at that time there are lot many more muscles which will come into action. Their contraction will take place, and they will help in this simple movement of the flexion and extension. Okay, and these muscle, they are called as fixator muscle. Let us see this simple movement and which are the fixator muscle. Okay, now when movements are taking place at distal end of the bone, see here it is humerus, and this is the distal end of the humerus, and which is forming a joint, that is elbow joint with the ulna here. Okay, and when movement is taking place, means movement of the flexion is taking place, the bending of the arm, I mean say forearm is taking place, and forearm is going towards the arm, that is the flexion movement. Then the proximal end of the humerus, so where these movements are taking place, at the distal end, that means flexion and extension are taking place at the distal end of the humerus. But at the same time, the muscles which are attached to the proximal end of the humerus, okay, they will undergo contraction. And why they will undergo contraction? Because they want to keep the upper end of the humerus fixed, absolutely fixed, rigidly fixed, so that the movement at its distal end of the flexion and extension at elbow can take place smoothly. So imagine that when the flexion, see my arm here, when this flexion and extension are taking place here, they are taking place smoothly. Just perform the flexion and extension in your own arm, and then put your, when these movements are taking place, just put your hand onto your shoulder joint. You will see that the muscles around the shoulder joint, okay, my hand is only on one muscle, that is deltoid muscle, and I am feeling that this muscle is contracted. Okay, it is in tough, it is okay, it has gone into the spasm or contraction, and this contraction is a prolonged contraction when this movement is taking place. Okay, either flexion or extension. There are many other muscles, okay, which you cannot feel from superficial aspect, and this muscle are also acting onto the upper end of the humerus to keep it fixed, and thus this movement is, I mean say this muscle which are keeping the upper end of the humerus, so that the movement of flexion and extension at the distal end of the humerus can take place smoothly. They are called as fixator. So all those muscle which are in contracted condition and attached to the upper end of the humerus, they all are classified as the fixator muscle. Now imagine that if these fixator muscles were not active at this time, then what will happen? That if you will try to produce this movement of the flexion, then your upper end or your shoulder joint will be moving here and there, and then this movement of flexion and extension, just move the shoulder joint while flexion is taking place, okay, will not be possible to perform the flexion and the extension movement. So the when elbow is flexing, the shoulder is fixed by the fixator of the shoulder. These muscles are called as fixator muscle. So when you are taught that the flexion takes place due to the contraction of biceps and brachialis muscle, okay, it is partly true. At the same time, your tricep is also acting and it is relaxing with the same speed, and at the same time the muscles acting on the upper end of the bone, okay, where this movement is taking place at its distal end, they are also active. So there are many more muscle involved in producing just a simple movement of the flexion and extension, right? I hope you have understood the fixator. Now I am moving to the next slide and will tell you about the synergist muscle. Now the last group of muscle, which are sometimes also called as fixator because their function is something like that of the fixator. Now if a long muscle crosses more than one joint, okay, more than one joint means, just take an example of the muscle which are taking origin from forearm. So that tendons which are long tendons and they are crossing the wrist joint, then they cross the carpo-metacarpal joint, then they cross the, okay, metacarpophalangeal joint, then they cross the interphalangeal joint, and they are attaching somewhere in the distal part of the phalanx, okay. So when this muscle of the forearm will contract, then they will produce the movement in all the intervening joints, okay, which are in between, okay. So they will produce the movement at the wrist joint, they will produce the movement at the intercarpal joint, they will produce the movement of the carpo metacarpal joints, and then interphalangeal joints. So many joints are involved, okay. So movement will be produced, okay, movement will be produced at different joints, okay. But just imagine an action of these muscles where you make a fist, okay, as I have made a fist here, tight fist I have made, okay. This is a very tight fist I have made here. What is happening in this movement? Because this is due to the contraction of the muscles which are going and getting attachment uh, to the digits, and they are crossing in front of the finger, and when these muscles of the forearm will contract, the first movement which will take place is the flexion of the digits, okay, the flexion of the finger at different interphalangeal joint, okay. And this I have made a strong fist here, a strong fist I have made it here, okay. Now but at the same time you can notice that this movement, which kind of this movement is at the wrist? Wrist is not flexed, though this joint I mean say tendon is crossing the wrist from anterior aspect. This is the opposite muscle, that means the extensor muscles are now contracted, so they are producing the movement of the extension at the wrist joint, but all other joints of the metacarpophalangeals and the interphalangeal joint of the digit or finger, they have gone into flexion. These are the two different kind of the movements, okay. Though there should have been a flexion of the wrist joint also like this, but instead of this there is a extension of, why this is there, okay. And those muscles which are responsible for producing the extension of the wrist, they are called as synergist muscle. They are called, why this synergist muscle are producing a opposite movement of extension at the wrist joint? The reason is that first you try to make a fist when your wrist is in a flex position. Try make a tight fist in the when your wrist is in the flex position. you will not be able to make a tight fist. Okay, and that is the reason why this wrist joint gets extended. Oh, and that's so that you can make a tight fist. Okay, you can make a tight fist here. So these muscles which fixes in one way through all, I mean say through the wrist joint and in slightly extended position, so that your fist is very strong fist, that these muscles, they are called as the synergist muscle. Okay, so during the fist formation, wrist is extended and fingers are flags. So this is another group of muscle which is acting to produce a desired movement. This is not just only the flexion of the long tendon which are crossing to the in front of the finger and you are just flexing the fingers. Okay, so moving to the last slide, let us see what this slide tells you. This slide tells you just a summary of the whole lecture. Thus far, a single movement at a joint, not only prime mover, but many more muscles are involved in the producing a desired movement. Which are those muscles beside the prime mover? They are antagonists, they are fixators, and the synergist. Thus, remember that everything is controlled by our brain, our nervous system, and movements are not simple. Okay, movements are not simple, they are much more complicated as we think. Thank you very much.